Ken's Good Vibes Podcast. Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of part 1, Ken's Good Vibes Podcast. And happy Valentine's Day to you all. Found right here on YouTube. I hope all of you have been having a great New Year so far. Today we'll be covering our 5 topics of discussion. What are your favorite things you like to do? Things you like to cook? What do you like to cook? What inspires you? What are your inspirations? What are your favorite types of music? What type of music do you like? Which music is your favorite as of lately? And what entertains you? What's your favorite form of entertainment? Alright guys, let's jump in. One of my favorite things is driving and traveling to new places. Just planning a trip and then getting up and going. And traveling to your destination. This makes me think of the time my roommate and I drove to Berlin, Ohio, out in Amish country. And we pulled up to the number 3 treehouse, which was said to be the biggest and tallest in the whole United States. We drove a car called the 2018 Ford Fusion Hybrid. It was like you were driving on a cloud. It was such a smooth ride and one of those cars I'd like to have. Another neat feature in which more cars are gearing toward nowadays is that when you are shifting from drive to reverse, for example, you actually turn a dial instead of pulling back the shifter to which gear you want to be in. The part of driving and traveling to your destination I enjoy the most is jamming out to some great tunes while on the way. This is especially fun when traveling with someone. Another really cool thing when you're traveling is just all the different sights that you see along the way. That's one of the things I think I enjoy the most about it. Things such as farmland, farm animals, as well. You see a lot of cows and horses, and that's pretty much the main animals, and then as well as just old gas stations, different signage, different signs for different businesses and buildings, as well as just the abundance of nature and all the beautiful scenery that comes along the way when traveling to that destination. So once we arrived, it was so cool. You enter a gravel driveway, and there is a carport which has like a abundance of trees, just over top of you, in which then you can park your car, and then once you walk up to the stairs, there's an archway above, and it leads down to the landing below, which you're at, and then eventually at the entrance of the treehouse. Once inside, the view is just incredible. The first floor is the largest, which is as soon as you walk in, the kitchen you have equipped full with plates, cups, glasses, and cutlery. You have some nice finished wooden cabinets. There's basically a bench seat / table that's there off to your left hand side when you walk in, and then across the way you have the living room. But it's just the way everything is constructed in this place is very authentic and has such a good craftsmanship. From the walls and the tables to the stairs leading up to the second and third floor. The living room is equipped with the flat screen TV for your viewing pleasure, and with a leather couch and reclining chair to sit in. There's a big window to view nature right next to you, along with a door with window leading to the porch outside. Here you can sit on a bench or rocking chair, whichever you prefer, whilst looking at all the deciduous trees around you. On the first floor, there's also a nice hot tub in the back room. It's really cool, and along with a nice frosted glass shower. And right next to you is just the woods, and you can just look right out at nature. On the second floor, you will find a bunk-like bed with a staircase leading up to the third floor. Also to your right, there's another bed, and next to that, a bathroom with a rain shower and a view right out to the woods, similar to the first floor. There is a door that leads right out to a porch, which has a wooden rocking chair. My roommate and I spent 3 days there. All in all, this was a great trip with one of the most amazing pieces of architecture I've ever seen. It was so authentic and constructed with some of the most beautiful wood. Afterward, we stopped at the wonderful Amish grocery market and picked up some candy and homemade baked goods. When we were at the shop where we were getting the Amish baked goods and candy, there was another part outside that had these really cool metal animal sculptures. And even the one was a metal smoking bowl grill. And then shortly after, we actually rode some huge horses. It was super cool, guys. They were big, not like Clydesdale, like massive horses, but they were fairly large horses. I'd say probably bigger than a normal size horse. And we just, went around in essentially like a circular track, and we just rode those horses, and it was just a lot of fun. and fed some farm animals, such as chickens, goats, cows, and pigs. So if you guys ever get the opportunity, again, this destination is the biggest and tallest in the U.S. Treehouse. Number 3, if you want to go to there, they have like 5 different tree houses though. But we wanted to check that one out exclusively, just to see what all the hubbub was about, and it was really cool. So if you guys ever get the opportunity, again, it's in Berlin, Ohio, an Amish country. I like classic old cars, and I've always had an attraction to them. Anything from old style Camaros to Corvettes, muscle cars. I just think they were much better built and made out of mostly metal. I mean, yeah, they were gas guzzlers, but the design of some of these cars were just so interesting to look at and just had such great curves on them. A lot of them were built for, the idea of the final frontier when the Sputnik programs were launched in Russia, and also for the first moon landing in the United States. A lot of these classic cars had these fins on them, and again, kind of relating back to the 50s to 60s cars. Those vehicles had the designs of these fins specifically because they had thought, okay, this is what the future, is going to look like, or sort of some foreshadowing for the future, to have those fins and it really accents the car well, or the cars well. Boy, I would love to have one of those garage kept one day. Well, another favorite thing of mine is cool Facebook pages. I swear I could spend hours and hours just browsing through different Facebook pages. One of these cool pages that I follow is called Sacred Geometry. It just has so many cool posts. For example, there's an artist on there. Her name is Nadia Satya. She's an artist that posted her artwork of very intricate geometric shapes in metallic colored pencils using the medium of on black foam board. And it's on a 20 by 20 inch black foam board. It is just so cool. Again, there's these metallic pencils that she used, what it looks like, and it's just really, really neat looking and intricate. And Nadia Satya gave me the permission to show this picture to you guys. Thanks, Nadia. Another person posted something related to the 4 elements of the shapes of something called Platonic Solids. The first thing that they show on there is called a tetrahedron, fire element, octahedron, air element, hexahedron, earth element, icosahedron, water element, and dodecahedron, aether element. Then underneath it shows many faces, points, and edges of each, along with their degrees. This actually makes me think of the time when I was in the Art Institute and I was first getting into 3D modeling. Speaking of faces, points, and edges, and in that case we called them polys, which is any side of a 3D object that has 3 or more points. If you take a square, for example, and you chop it in half from the upper left-hand corner to the bottom right-hand corner, then that becomes 2 tries. So we used to always say in the game industry, or in my modeling classes, how many tries does that have? Essentially, if you have a polygon, which is any number of sides which are 3 or more points that create a polygon. But for the purposes of having a polygon in which can what's known as triangulate into 2 tries, we would always strive for having a 4-sided polygon. If you have a 3-sided polygon, which can work in certain instances, depending on, if you're creating a character and you need it to flex in such a way, like under the armpit or anywhere that you're going to have the character where there's going to be rotation of limbs, that can work, but it typically doesn't triangulate well, because if you take a triangle and you try to split it in half, you're going to have an issue, because there's not enough points or vertexes, as we used to say, to be able to support the triangulation. So with a 4-sided object like a square or rectangle, you have the consistency of it being cut into 2 triangles versus it being a three vertex shape like a triangle, which cannot triangulate, or if it tries to triangulate, it will be more problematic. This was especially important when you had a high poly model, what's known as, where you are sculpting this model. Let's just say, for example, a character model in 3D that you're creating for a game, or to eventually have put into what's known as a game engine. You would have to, when you create that model, in any type of program like 3ds Max, or in this case ZBrush, we'll just use for example, you can sculpt that model out and make it look really, really cool and all. But then before you plug that into a game engine to actually become the playable character, you need to create what's known as a low poly model over top of that. What I mean by low poly model is essentially you have to do something called retopology, which means that for every four-sided polygon that is on that high poly model that's really, really detailed, you need to create a lower poly version of that in order to, for actually a number of reasons. One reason is because you cannot put that high poly model into the game engine because there's so many millions of polygons in that model, because it's so detailed and highly sculpted that it will essentially make the game engine freeze up like crazy and potentially could make it crash if you put the high poly model in there. And when you do a low poly model over top of it, it allows you to take that high poly model and then bake out what's known as a normal map, and that essentially puts on the depth over top of your low poly model once you bake that out. And then therefore you can essentially take the high poly model details and then bake it onto the low poly, as well as, and another thing that is great about low poly models is the fact that you can animate them much, much more smoothly than you can a high poly model. It's still possible to do a high poly model animation, but it's definitely easier and more readily available to do it on a low poly version of that high poly model. To give you guys another example of what I mean by going from a high poly model to then retopologizing or doing retopo of a low poly model is, let's say for example, on the shoulder of your character, there's a group of 16 polygons that are all tightly knit together to provide that detail that you're looking for in the sculptor of the shoulder. Well, you would have to then, in the retopology process, there are certain tools that you can use depending on which in which you're retopologizing on. In ZBrush, we're just going to use that for this case example, and you basically draw out a point of creating 4 vertexes, which then would cover those 16 polygons and then become 1 polygon. So it really, really minimizes on the amount when you're doing a retopology, and that's why it's so important to do that when you are creating your low poly model. It minimizes on how many polys that there are, and it really helps in that way too. And that's the whole reason for creating a low poly model, is so that you're creating what's known as the game ready mesh. This creates you to have the game ready mesh to enter into the game engine, and that way it reads a lot less information and is less tasking on that game engine in order for it to successfully be part of the game. As I had mentioned before, the game engine, when you have the low poly model in there, there's a lot of less information that it has to read rather than the high poly model, which is why that's important to have as a game ready mesh for the low poly model. Another thing I wanted to piggyback off of with that is the fact that when you put a game ready mesh into the game engine, or any mesh for that matter, it does the triangulation process that we were talking about earlier. And that's why it's of utmost importance when you're creating your game ready mesh to make sure that it has as many 4-sided polygons, squares, diamonds, rectangles that you can get, because once it does that triangulation in the game engine, then it will make it that much better, if it's 4-sided versus like 3-sided or 5-sided. 5-sided will work too, anything above that, but it just triangulates it to match up to the vertexes in a little bit of a different way. It doesn't split it in half. It'll essentially put it into it 2/3 instead of it splitting it in half, like a four-sided object or four-sided polygon. I remember back in the day when I was first in my earlier classes, such as Principles of 3D Modeling, and I would have to take, let's say, I remember specifically at one point in time we had to create a scene that had a crate involved in it, and I took a high poly version of that I was created in 3ds Max with essentially harder edges on the corners, and then it's like an inset square on each of the 6 sides of the crate. And I had to then, with my low poly of that version in 3ds Max, put it over top of, as close to essentially snapping the vertexes all together over top of that high poly crate. And then at that point, I then had to go to where you had to bake out the normal map in 3ds Max, and they had to be so closely knit to each other, one model over top of the other, in order to bake out the normal map. And that was the process at the time. And then once you got your normal map, baked out, and essentially you had to do this for mainly the normal map, but it was also done for maps such as the diffuse map, as well as it was done for specularity, and also like ambient occlusion map that's dealing with the shading on the high poly model, sort of transferring that over to lighting and shading, transferring it over to as a map onto the low poly object, and then as well as several other maps. In my later quarters, for example, my advanced character modeling class, I remember that when we were creating a character at that time, ZBrush had what's known as the Retopology tool. So basically, instead of having to, like in 3ds Max, take your high poly model and then put your low poly model over top of it and get as closely lined up as you could, the Retopology tool in ZBrush would allow you to essentially, with that tool, just create your polygons and snap essentially 4 vertexes together to create one poly, and it just would go right over top of and snap right over top of your model. So that was super cool. It was definitely a big game changer and something that I thoroughly enjoyed versus having to position like we used to do in 3ds Max in my previous, like, earlier quarters. Also, another really cool thing I had happened in my later quarters. I was in a advanced animation class. We had one animation class, really cool teacher. He was a younger guy. He was definitely really knowledgeable in animation. He actually was an adjunct professor who actually graduated from the Art Institute. It's really cool. And with that being said, he actually taught both of these courses, and because he was so well versed in animation. And the second animation class we had to create a walking animation, and also we had to do an animation in which mapped the facial features of essentially a high poly model of our own head to a low poly model. And that was super, super interesting. We used, I forget exactly what they were called, but essentially we set up sliders in ZBrush, and we were able to basically create an animation in ZBrush in which we mapped over to our low poly head of our own head. And I remember I did my own self in the video that we took of a snippet of ourselves. We just had to bake out a video in 3ds Max or Maya, whichever program you're going to use to do animation in, or port over the animation from ZBrush to 3ds Max. And I did the song "Asking All Them Questions" by Spoken Reasons and Kosher. By the way, guys, I discovered Spoken Reasons. He's a YouTuber, and he is hilarious. If you ever get a chance to check out his videos, I highly recommend it. He just has the most hilarious content. He talks about some of the funniest stuff. It just cracks me up every time. So, yep, that's where the song "Asking All Them Questions" is originally from. If you ever get the chance, check it out on YouTube. It's with, again, Kosher feat. Spoken Reasons. Okay, guys, this leads us into our next topic of discussion today. Favorite things you like to cook. What are some of the things you like to cook as of lately? One of the favorite things I like to cook is breakfast food. It's one of my favorite types of food. If I could have one food in the world that I would have to live on for the rest of my life, it would be breakfast food. Absolutely. It's very hearty and it makes you feel filled up. They say that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I truly believe that. And it's the first amount of energy that your body gets when it wakes up. So that makes it more important to have breakfast in the morning. Sometimes the breakfast can be smaller, coffee and a banana. I have that sometimes in the morning, or it can be bigger. Like, in this case, I'm going to talk about a recipe in which I make a nice breakfast of scrambled eggs with buttered toast and your choice of coffee or with your choice of creamer or milk and sugar. I'm personally a fan of this creamer I've been having as of lately. It's white chocolate raspberry flavored. That is super good. It just transforms the coffee into this nice flavored awesomeness. So, or you can have a good breakfast tea if you prefer tea over coffee. So now we're going to jump into the recipe here for how I create the recipe, which I'll call or title as scrambled eggs with butter toast. How you start the egg mixtures. First, grab any mixing bowl and get the amount of eggs you would like. In this case, I used 4. First, crack the eggs open in a small ceramic bowl. Be careful not to get any of the eggshells in the egg mixture. Next, with a fork, pull out the white embryo from the 4 eggs. Now, in this case, this is something in which you don't have to do, but I remember back in the day, my mom would always do this when I would watch her cook in the kitchen. And she would always take a fork and take out the white embryos from the eggs. So she would explain to me that, and the reason she would do this is so that there wouldn't be these hard little pieces in the, apparently when you begin to fry up the eggs, it has these hard little parts which would be part of the embryo. So that always just is something that stuck with me. Again, this isn't something you have to do, but it calls for the recipe, that's what I chose to do. Next, pour your eggs in the mixing bowl. Afterward, pour a 1/4 cup of milk into the egg mixture. This creates your eggs to be fluffy. Then, put a tablespoon of salt and a tablespoon of black pepper into the mixture. Now you're going to want to beat the eggs. What that means is you either with a fork or a whisk or an electric whisk, whichever you prefer, you mix up the entire mixture until you see usually it's like a lightish yellow color. Once this is mixed well, now put your butter in the pan, or spray the pan with Pam. Usually spray with Pam, either way. Turn the burner on to 9 in order to heat the pan to melt the butter and make it hot for your egg mixture. Next, pour your egg mixture and leave it in the pan, when seeing the eggs becoming more hard. Then, with your spatula, continuously move around your egg mixture. Keep doing this until you see the liquefied egg become clumpy and more solid. Keep stirring these eggs until they look light and yellow in color and fluffy. Do this for 5 to 7 minutes and then turn the burner down to 6 or 7. Once you begin to see hardly any liquid and just fluffy eggs, then reduce the heat to 3 to 4. Cook until no liquid is left, then keep stirring scrambled eggs. Once done, then remove and put on your plate. The next thing to make is your buttered toast. Take 2 slices of bread. In this case, I used a George Foreman grill. And then spread butter onto each slice of bread. Place both slices of bread on the George Foreman grill. Then close the lid on top of them. The red light will be initially on. Once done grilling, the light will turn green. When that is done, grab both slices with some tongs and place the 2 pieces of buttered toast on the plate. Lastly, I like to eat a little tad of hot sauce with my eggs. I put a little Cholula green chili hot sauce. Boy, does that have a great taste and spice to it. Okay guys, so that was the recipe for scrambled eggs with buttered toast. Next, we're going to jump into our following topic, which is what inspires you? What are your inspirations? What inspires me are our 5 senses. Sense of smell, sense of taste, sense of hearing, sense of sight, and sense of touch. Also, arguably your 6th sense, which people say is a sense of intuition or having a clairvoyance for predicting a future event. And also, you may be able to throw in there déjà vu as well, where you have the feeling that you've been somewhere before, and it's such a strong feeling when you're in that moment. And They inspire me because they allow us to help be guided through our lives and thus make us want to keep them intact for as long as we are willing and able. Take sense of smell, for example. It's amazing to think that smelling something can bring back memories from the past. People that I've met say that I must have been a dog in my past life because my acute sense of smell. For example, the other day my roommate was making something in the kitchen. I could smell the oil being heated up in the pan, and then he said, "I'm cooking something for you to try. I think you'll like it." I then smelled it again and smelled eggs, and the crisp smell of toast when you put it in the frying pan. I then said, "Let me guess, you were making French toast?" He had turned around with a surprised look on his face and said, "How did you know?" I then told him that I had smelled it. He then said, not believing me, "No, really, how did you know?" This has happened on other occasions as well. Another time I was at work and I had smelled what I had recognized to be a peppery, pungent odor, almost similar to mothballs. I said, "It smells like a stink bug somewhere nearby." My coworker said, "Oh, really? Are you sure?" Then they looked around, and sure enough, there was a stink bug across inside the partition of the window on the outside. Maybe this was because I had smelled the scent before and it had become more like a muscle memory to the point of being able to pick up the scent right away. Or maybe this, amongst other senses, was just naturally heightened. I'm not sure, but either way, I know that I've always had an acute sense of smell. Okay, guys, this is going to be wrapping up Ken's Good Vibes podcast, episode 3, part 1. Next, on episode 2, we'll be continuing with what inspires you or what are your inspirations, and following with the final 2 topics of what is your favorite type of music or what type of music are you into, and also what is your favorite form of entertainment, what entertains you. More to come in Ken's Good Vibes podcast.